right, let's just start with telling me your name and where you're from.
I'm Wilma Baldridge, and I live in Tahlequah, Oklahoma.
Okay.
Uh,
Well,
used,
thank you, Wilma, for joining us. We're just going to start asking questions first off about your childhood. And so, what can you recall about your childhood?
I I recall that I had a very peaceful childhood. Um, my family lived out at the edge of what is now called Mosley Prairie, and we had woods around us on almost all sides, and lived up on a hill. Um, and I had a sister a couple of years older than I was, and we moved to that place in 1948 when I was almost 4 years old, and uh, playing was going out and discovering everything we could in the woods, and it was open range at that time. We had a couple of milk cows. Um, they roamed everywhere, so around milking time, if they weren't getting home yet, my mom and my sister and I would go look for the cows, and we learned all kinds of things about plants from my mom, the names of the wildflowers and the edible plants, and we it was just a nice, peaceful time. My dad was a self-taught musician. He played rhythm guitar, and he and several neighbors would get together once a week and play music, or they'd play at pie suppers. Uh, so we had a lot of music and singing going on in our house, and it was just a fun time.
Were your, were your parents farmers, or what did they do for a living?
They had a few crops, but they couldn't really grow enough crops on that 10 acres to feed themselves totally. So Dad usually worked out. He drove a milk truck, picked up the canned milk and took it into the dairy, and we always had a garden. Mom canned the vegetables, and we'd gather wild fruits and things, berries.
So, what age did you start going to school, and where did you go to school?
I went to school at a local um, one-room school. It was called Carnes School. Uh, it was in Delaware County, but it was so close to the Adair County line that it was called a joint district, and we lived in the very northern part of Adair County. Um, Grades 1 through 8 attended there, and uh, the teachers were, for the upper grades, Grace Bailey, and the lower grades, Vera Harris. And they were good teachers.
Did your family have any special traditions around holidays or birthdays?
Um, there wasn't a lot of money to really do much for those days, but there was usually, a cake made for the birthdays, and uh, the school would have a pie supper and raise money to have gifts for all of the children, and they would buy candy, and a sack of candy and fruit would be given to every family in the community, whether they had children in the school or not. And that they gave those things away at what they called the Christmas tree every year, and that's when the students would receive their little gift that was bought with some of that money. And my parents always tried to get some kind of a small gift for us, and we were Christians, but we didn't attend a church. We were strictly non-denominational, and we didn't really find a church in our community we wanted to attend. So we focused more on the Christian meaning of the celebration.
Okay. When did you leave home? Like, what was the reason you left home?
I first left home when I was about 17. I graduated from high school right after I became 17. And so I went to Connors Junior College and stayed in the dorms there. And if I could get a ride home for the weekends, I would come home for the weekend. And I had a friend that graduated the same year I did, and I rode back and forth with her. So I got to come home pretty often. My sophomore year at Connors, she was no longer in school there, so I didn't get to come home as much. And that was kind of a weaning away for me, I guess, getting away from home.
What did you study at Connors?
Just a general education there, and I started working toward majoring in language arts and in education. And from there I went on to Oklahoma State University,
Okay.
and that's
So
where
even further away. From
farther away, yeah.
How did you enjoy Oklahoma State?
It was, I enjoyed it. I didn't really get to know a lot of people. There were just so many students there from all, many foreign nations, and but I enjoyed being there, and I would meet several of them, and it broadened my experiences.
So I noticed you were wearing the Daughters of the American Revolution, and running a booth at this event.
Yes.
How did you find out you were related to someone who was in the revolution?
I became interested in genealogy, and I didn't research for that purpose, but one of the ladies that I knew was in DAR kept encouraging me to try to find out if some of those were. So with her help, I discovered I had more than one patriot in my family, and decided to go ahead and join the DAR.
So when about did you start getting into genealogy? Like, what kind of year was this?
Probably after I was 50. I was always interested, though, in family history.
Yeah.
And if we went to visit, I wish I had taken notes earlier, but I began to take a notebook with me when we would go visit my mother's relatives, and I'd ask questions, and a lot of my father's relatives were already deceased, and I couldn't talk to them about it. And there's so many questions that I now think I wish I could have asked that question. But after I retired around the age of 59, I really was able to dig deeper, and there was more and more and more on the computer. So a lot of what I do, research, I find on the computer now.
Okay. So go to Oklahoma State University, get a teaching's degree.
Yes.
What was your first teaching job? Like, what schools did you go to?
My first teaching job was at Theodore Roosevelt Junior High in Tulsa. And I was only there a year, and we moved to Corpus Christi, Texas. And at that time, my first year of teaching was 1965, 66. So when we moved to Corpus Christi in 66, there was there's a shortage of teachers almost everywhere. I didn't worry about not finding another job. And I taught taught mathematics in a junior high there because that was my minor.
So, what kind of teaching job did you have towards the end of your career, like before you retired?
Oh, the hardest one. I had gone back and finished my master's degree and also became certified as a school librarian. And so my last 10 years, I started from scratch a library at Central Elementary in the Tahlequah system. It was a 5th and 6th grade center. And the reason I say that was probably the hardest job I ever had is because I was teaching library skills to all of the students, and there were between 450 and 500 students each year there. And I worked with each of the teachers that I could get to cooperate with me. I would work to teach those lessons through whatever units they were teaching, so that we were team teaching. And so there was a lot of planning, and plus I was in charge of all of the equipment in the classrooms. So I did a lot of physical work as well as a lot of PR and planning.
So, what significant historical event has taken place during your life, like most changed, like your perception? If that makes sense. Or it's taken place during your lifetime. What do you think is the most important historical events that's taken place?
Oh my goodness.
You can give several if that helps.
I can what?
Like what?
What was the last statement you made?
What events have taken place in your lifetime, and if you can't narrow it down, give a list and just make it easier.
I think the one that touched me the most was the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
Where were you when that happened?
I was a student at OSU. I was taking a course in Introduction to the Theater in the theater where plays were presented. And I think that building has since been razed. It doesn't, I don't think it exists anymore. But I went to the class right after lunch, walked in and walked down toward the front because we always sat at the front seats in the theater and waited for the instructor, and I could hear people talking, but nobody, they were wondering, where's our instructor? She's usually here by this time. And when she walked in, she just walked up behind the podium and said, I failed to see the importance of the history of the theater today, and you're dismissed. And we all were like, what's happened, you know? And then someone else came in later, and they were telling us what had happened. But being able to be among people my own age, and we had a special ceremony on campus outdoors during that time. That was really touching. And he had been probably the first president I paid a whole lot of attention to. I had even considered going to the Peace Corps for a while, and at one time thought about joining the women's army, you know, the military. But at that time I was only 17 and Dad wouldn't sign the papers. So I've always been patriotic, and anyway, that event touched me. I don't know that it changed me that much unless it just made me that much more patriotic.
I worded that question weird, so.
Yeah. currently, it saddens me to see that I think there are so many ways that our Constitution is being changed. And I'm not that conservative. I guess I'm what you might call a moderate liberal. But I still see things happening political that, to me, are dangerous, and we could possibly lose our ability to. Yeah, the Constitution is being weakened a great deal.
Are there any other sort of events that are noteworthy that you can think of?
Well, I know the disasters in space and 9/11. You know, they were all bad. But and I was still teaching at that time, so we were told, try not to be too emotional because the students need stability.
Yeah.
And so I remember a student, I was teaching at Watts High School in Adair County at the time of the Challenger disaster, and one of the students accused me of not caring because I wasn't falling apart and crying like they were, you know. But we just felt like we had to be strong for them and not let that kind of thing, you know, happen to us. So I guess they couldn't really see what was going on inside us.
So, did you know your grandparents? Like, did you ever have contact with them?
Yes, I didn't have a lot of contact with my mother's parents because about the time I was born, they moved to California, and we didn't have the money for traveling that much. But they did come back a couple of times for visits, so I got to see them then. And my grandfather died much younger than my grandmother did, and she came back and stayed with several of her daughters, a little while with one, a little while with another. So I got to know her really well. And my dad's parents lived not far from us, so I really knew them, but they died much younger than the others.
Yeah.
So they were both descended from what I guess some people would call hill people. They had moved from Tennessee when my granddad moved from Tennessee when he was really young to Newton County, Arkansas, and my grandmother was born in Arkansas. So they knew about home remedies and the old mountain music and just they had the knowledge of survival. They could survive with nothing, and they passed that on to their children. My dad was that way. He could make anything out of nothing, and if something wasn't working on the farm, he could figure out a way to patch it or fix it, or you know, it wasn't just let's go get a new one. Yeah.
And they pass that information down to you and your siblings?
I think we all were the kind that we tried to find a way to fix things instead of just going and buying a new one. Yeah, it's kind of an innate ability, and he really couldn't pass that to us, but he gave us the encouragement and the confidence to know that, you know, we wouldn't stumble over hitting just one little roadblock or something. Yeah.
All right, Wilma. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you for participating in this event at large. So.
All right, you're welcome.